Hello, and welcome back to the Bible Difficulties and Answers podcast. I'm your host, Lance Smith, and today we're diving into a fascinating mystery that has puzzled scholars and skeptics alike. How could the Hittites be in Hebron in 2050 BC if their kingdom was in Turkey? Again, this is a chapter in Genesis, chapter 23, that atheists love to point to as to why the Bible is incorrect. That being said, let's explore. Did the sons of Heth somehow make an early migration to Canaan, or does this raise deeper questions about biblical timelines and ancient migrations? Let's find out together what archaeology and scripture reveal about the Hittites' surprising presence in Canaan. Let's kick things off with Genesis 23, 1-6 from the New Living Translation. When Sarah was 127 years old, she died at Kiriath Arba, now called Hebron, in the land of Canaan. There Abraham mourned and wept for her. Then leaving her body, he said to the Hittite elders, "Here I am, a stranger and a foreigner among you. Please sell me a piece of land so I can give my wife a proper burial." The Hittites replied to Abraham, "Listen, my lord, you are an honored prince among us. Choose the finest of our tombs and bury her there. No one here will refuse to help you in this way." All right, quick aside. Interestingly enough, this is the only time in all of Scripture that a female's age of death, Sarah at 127 years old, is ever mentioned. So let's set the stage with the problem as defined by the Big Book of Bible Difficulties. But they write this: Heth was the progenitor of the Hittites, whose kingdom was located in what is now modern Turkey. But according to some archaeological evidence, the Hittites did not become a prominent force in the Middle East until the reign of Mursalai I, which began about 1620 BC, and who captured the city of Babylon in 1600 BC. However, several times in Genesis 23, reference is made to Abraham's encounter with the sons of Heth, who controlled Hebron around 2050 BC. How could the Bible claim the presence of Hittites in control of Hebron so many years before they became a significant force in the area? Now, here's the solution as outlined in the Big Book of Bible Difficulties, and honestly, they absolutely nail it here. They write, more recent archaeological evidence comes from cuneiform tablets describing conflicts in Anatolia, modern Turkey, among the various Hittite principalities from about 1950 to 1850 BC. Even before this conflict, however, there was a race of non-Indo-Europeans called Hattians. These people were subdued by invaders about 2300 to 2000 BC. These Indo-European invaders adopted the name Hatti. In Semitic languages, words like Hebrew, Hatti, and Hittite would be written with the same letters because only the consonants were written, not the vowels. In the days of Ramses II of Egypt, the military strength of the Hittites was sufficient to precipitate a non-aggression pact between Egypt and the Hittite Empire, which set a boundary between them. At this time, the Hittite Empire reached as far south as Kadesh on the Orontes River, modern Aussie. However, additional evidence indicates that the Hittites actually penetrated further south into Syria and Palestine. Although the Hittite kingdom did not reach its zenith until the second half of the 14th century, there is sufficient evidence to substantiate a Hittite presence in Hebron at that time of Abraham, which was significant enough to control the area." End quote. Back to me. This could be the end of the podcast and it would be complete. But let's get into the weeds here, because based on my research, there are 7 factors that support the presence of Hittites in Canaan during Abraham's time, which we're looking at around 2000 to 1900 BC. The first factor is early Hittite settlements. The Institute for Creation Research notes that an early colony of Hittites had settled in Canaan by around 1900 BC. Detailing further, an article, Sons of Heth, from the Institute of Creation Research adds this: Ephron, from whom Abraham purchased the cave, was a Hittite. We find that in Genesis 23:10. And the Hittites, known on the monuments as Hatti, were sons of Heth, who was a son of Canaan. We see that in Genesis 10:15. The great Hittite Empire was centered in what is now Turkey, but had colonies in various places. The covenant between Abraham and Ephron contains a number of words and concepts now known to be typical of Hittite documents. End quote. So, archaeological evidence suggests that Hittite or Proto-Hittite groups were present in various parts of the Near East, including Canaan, before the establishment of their main kingdom in Anatolia. All right, the second factor is Hittite expansion. While the main Hittite Empire was centered in what is now Turkey, they established colonies and settlements in various regions. As the Biblical Archaeology Society states, the Hittite Empire at one time extended into the land of Canaan. This expansion could explain the presence of Hittite communities in Canaan during Abraham's time. From the September-October 2023 article, Finding the Hittites by Christopher Eames and George Haddad, we find this, and I quote, "As such, it is the indigenous Hattians rather than the better-known Indo-European Hittites who could best be considered the direct descendants of the biblical patriarch Heth. Evidently, their names stuck for the territory. Trevor Bryce explains in his 1998 book, The Kingdom of the Hittites, that the ancient Hittites typically refer to themselves as the people of the land of Hatti, also Hatti land, not necessarily the descendants of Hatti themselves. Therefore, it is possible that the biblical children of Heth, with whom the patriarchs dealt, were themselves Hattians, literal descendants of Heth, while the other more general references in the Bible to Hittites could refer either to the indigenous Hattians, to the Indo-European Hittites, or to an amalgamation of both." End quote. The third factor is biblical references. The Bible consistently mentions Hittites living in Canaan during the patriarchal period. For example, Abraham purchased the cave of Machpelah from Ephron the Hittite in Hebron. These references suggest that the Hittite communities were well established in the region. From the source Abraham and the Hittites, courtesy of the Watchtower Online Library, we find this, and I quote, "In 1906, in Asia Minor, 90 miles west of Ankara, Turkey, excavations were begun of what would prove to be the ancient Hittite capital city, Bukaz-Kei, where some 10,000 clay tablets were found written in the Hittite and other dead languages of the past. Many of these tablet documents have now been deciphered, and from them much of the language, laws, and culture of the Hittites has been reconstructed. It is now commonly accepted that the Hittites operated a vast ancient empire dominating most of Asia Minor with an extension of their political control over most of Palestine from the years of about 2000 to 1200 BC. Therefore, Hittite government and law dominated much of the land of Canaan during the sojourn of Abraham in the Promised Land." End quote. The fourth factor is linguistic evidence. The Biblical Archaeology Society points out that the original Hebrew pronunciation of Hittite was likely Hatti, which matches how the Hittites refer to themselves. This linguistic connection supports the accuracy of the biblical account. Ellen White, in the April 25, 2024 article, Who Are the Hittites?, supports this line of evidence with this, and I quote, "So who were the Hittites? The older Hittites never self-identified as Hittites, but called their language Nesite and their land Hatti, referred to themselves as the people of Hatti. Had scholars known from the beginning what has been subsequently uncovered, these people would probably be called Nesites or perhaps Nessians. When the once mighty kingdom collapsed, those in the former Syrian vassal states kept the culture alive, becoming the Neo-Hittites. The archaeological record reveals the story of the original Hittites, while the Bible refers mostly to the Neo-Hittites." All right, the fifth factor is archaeological confirmation. Excavations have uncovered evidence of Hittite presence in the region. For detail, we quoted the Watchtower Online Library earlier. From the same resource, it notes that archaeological discoveries since 1871 have confirmed the Bible record of their existence. The sixth factor is cultural practices. The account of Abraham's purchase of the cave of Machpelah reflects Hittite legal customs. As the Institute for Creation Research states, and I quote, "This entire transaction has been illuminated by archaeology, and there is little doubt that it reflects accurately the customs of that period around 1900 BC, especially among the Hittites," end quote. And the seventh and final factor is the distinction from the later Hittite Empire. It's important to note that the Hittites mentioned in early biblical narratives may not be identical to the later Anatolian Hittite Empire. As Trevor Bryce from his 1998 book, The Kingdom of Hittites, suggests, biblical references to Hittites can be separated into two groups: early Canaanite tribes encountered by Abraham and his family, and later references to the more powerful Hittite Empire. Okay, we have these 7 clear factors, but where does it actually leave us? From the September-October 2023 article, Are Biblical Hittites in Canaan Anachronistic? By Christopher Eames, he says this, and I quote, "In light of such, even the possibility of such, is it just or necessary to conclude the biblical references to Hittites as far south as Canaan during the 2nd millennium BC as confused or anachronistic, more bluntly, as wrong? Quite the contrary. Archaeology, which by its own limitations can only give us a minimal picture anyway, does speak evidentially to the presence of Hittite culture and an influence deep within Canaan across the 2nd millennium BC. It's also worth pointing out that the Bible does not make out Canaan to be some veritable capital of the Hittite Empire. Joshua 1:4 informs us that the main body of this polity was in the far north. Judges 1:26 also points to the separation of Israel from the Hittite heartland. It is likewise notable that, particularly during the patriarchal period, Hittites are described on a very individual basis as living within the territory of Canaan." End quote. Back to me. This was a fun episode today. In light of the evidence, it is clear that the presence of the Hittites in Canaan by 2050 BC isn't a stretch, but a reality grounded in archaeology and history. The term Hittites could refer to both indigenous Hattians and the Indo-European settlers, both of whom influenced early Canaan. Early migrations, settlements, and cultural expansions allowed the Hittites to establish footholds in Canaan, as confirmed by records of local customs and the shared heritage between Anatolia and Canaan. This historical blend aligns with the Bible's description of Abraham's interactions with Hittite elders in Hebron, affirming the Bible's record of these early settlers long before their empire rose in Anatolia. The mystery, it turns out, has a clear answer grounded in both Scripture and archaeology. This was a fascinating dive into both scholarship and archaeology. No risk to life and limb required, like Indiana Jones might face. Thanks for tuning in. Next week, we'll tackle an intriguing puzzle. Why does Genesis 25:1 call Keturah Abraham's wife, while 1 Chronicles 1:32 calls her his concubine? I promise it'll be a captivating dive into ancient family dynamics, so you won't want to miss it. And as always, studying the Bible isn't just about finding answers. It's also about asking the right questions. Thanks for listening. As always, we love hearing from our listeners. We now have a Bible Difficulties and Answers Facebook page where you can interact with me and other followers of the show. You may also reach us at our website, BibleDifficultiesandAnswers.podbean.com, or you may reach out to me directly at our email address, BibleDifficultiesandAnswers@gmail.com, with any questions, comments, concerns, fits of righteous indignation, or just to say hi. I'm always glad to hear from our listeners. Also, please like and subscribe to this podcast. Tell a friend or two as well, and also write a review and give it a 5-star rating on Apple Podcasts, Podbean, Spotify, YouTube, or any of your venues of choice. It really does help get the word out about the most amazing book ever written. Again, I'm Lance Smith. Until next time, I wish you good luck, good health, and God bless. So long, everybody.